So, the most important decision that you're gonna make before you plant your hops. What variety should I plant? Hey folks, Max Raphael here from Hops World. Tip number 52. What variety of hops should I plant? 15 tips to help you choose. Let's do it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is public versus proprietary varieties. So what that means is public varieties are the varieties that are available to us to be able to grow. The proprietary varieties are actually varieties that were created by private companies and private hops farms. They spent lots of money, invested lots of time, and they control all the genetics. So anybody that grows their varieties is not allowed to sell rhizomes or plants, and they are controlled with contracts. So we really need to mostly talk about the public varieties. And the Zeus Cascade Centennial are US varieties that have been around for a while. Brewer's Gold is an ancient variety. You have Magnum, which is from Germany. Fuggle is an English variety, real ancient. And Triumph down there is one of the newer US public varieties that's readily available for us to grow. The proprietary varieties, unfortunately, are the ones that most people ask me about growing, especially Citra, Mosaic, Galaxy, and Amarillo, Sabro. Some of these are definitely the best hops out there, but unfortunately, we can't grow them. So the question is, what is available in my part of the world where I live? Well, fortunately, the International Hops Growers Convention has a website, and they actually have 21 countries and then some private organizations and groups that are included in this group that actually list and kind of have control over all the hops varieties in the world. And if you look at their variety page, which I'll put a link in the description below, they start with their varieties in the first column. The second column is actually their code name before it became a commercial variety. And the third column is synonyms. For example, Sass and Sasser. And then it tells you if it's an aroma hops or a bitter hops. And this is important, this little column here is actually the IHGC code. Recently, IHGC gave a 3-letter or alphanumeric code for every different kind of hops in the world. And every new hops that comes along will have a 3-letter code. Then it tells you the origin, country, and if it had a patent originally. And here's the patent rights. So this here will tell you if the plant should be available publicly or if not. And some of these patents have expired. Doesn't mean it's still available, but most of them are. And then here you can look up the country where you live or a country nearby to see which plants were grown in what country. I'm going to run down the list here real quick. There's actually 10 pages of different varieties of hops. I'll put a link here to the description of this variety page. It's amazing, the new hops varieties that are coming out every year. Hopefully we'll be able to use some of these now and in the future. So now we need to think about individual country availability, what we can get in the country where we live. If we plan on importing hops, we should check the importation laws and make sure there's not any quarantine requirements. And believe it or not, some countries have individual registration of varieties. The way we have it in Brazil, believe it or not, There are only certain varieties that are registered with the government that are available, 41 female and 1 male. And also be careful in the United States because there are some states where it's illegal to import hops, mostly in the Pacific Northwest, that they're trying to prevent the spread of powdery mildew. So, prior to purchasing any rhizomes or hops plants, definitely check your local, state, and national laws about importing or buying plants where you live. And if in doubt, ask your seller or propagator what the laws are. And if they don't know, I would consider buying from someone else, because minimally you could lose your plant material, and worst case, you could get fines or actual criminal charges. So number 4 is whether you want to grow hops as a hobby or commercially. As a hobby, it's to make your own beer, and that's pretty simple. If you want to make Pilsner beer, you plant Sass. If you want to make a Saison, plant Sriracha. If you want to make an IPA, plant Magnum or Zeus. It's pretty simple. Now, on a commercial scale, it's a lot more complicated, and there's many more factors. We're going to talk about them shortly. And number 5 on our list is whether you're going to grow your hops organically or non-organically. It's a decision you need to make. If you grow organically, you're going to have a few difficulties. One, and the hardest and most important, is probably eradicating any bugs or fungus outbreaks. There just aren't nearly as many products that will help you against these problems. The second thing is difficulty feeding your newts. You're going to have to use all organic fertilizer and nutrients. Just not as easy and not nearly as many available. The third thing is normally in organic hops growing, you get lesser yields than non-organic. And there are hops growers that get just about the same, but it's rather difficult to get the same yields. Now, there are a couple of pros. Obviously, it's way better for the environment to grow organically. And supposedly, there are places that actually pay more for organic hops. Although it seems like a tough sell, at least here in the United States. But I think that it might be just a better selling point, even if it isn't a different price point than non-organic hops, which might make it definitely an easier sell. And now, non-organic or conventional hops growing. You definitely have many more tools available at your disposal to treat any kind of bug outbreaks or mildews. And the ease of fertilization. You use the fertigation system in your drip irrigation. It's really a lot simpler. There's way more products out there. And then you always, 99% of the time I've heard, you have better yields just because you can get more fertilizers and have healthier plants. Now the cons to non-organic hops growing is obviously it's not as good for the environment, and using all kinds of fertilizers and chemicals definitely isn't good for the future of this little world that we live in. And the other con, I don't know if it's really a con because I don't think there's too much difference in price point, and if you're growing on a larger scale, I don't see it really being able to sell tons and tons of organic hops necessarily. I haven't seen it really even advertised that way. So whether there's a difference in the price or not is still remains to be seen. But that's the difference between organic and non-organic hops growing. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the plants that would probably be best varieties if you want to try organic growth. You can grow organic any way, any different variety. It's just a lot trickier, and there's really some tricks to it. We're not going to go into it here in this video. But there's definitely some varieties that would probably have a better chance of doing better. We'll talk about that now. So for organic hops production, it's really important to choose varieties that are resistant to disease and insects. And the most important thing are varieties that are resistant to downy mildew, because powdery mildew is a lot easier to treat in an organic fashion. And it's important to source clean, virus-free hops. It's not really easy to find, especially in a lot of areas, but do a good search, and it's better to start with virus-free plants. Start clean and stay clean. So for organic production, I chose mostly downy mildew and real robust, strong type of plants. Brewer's Gold, Cascade, Chinook, Fuggle, a lot of the English varieties and those that have them genetics are immune to downy mildew. Triple Pearl, Bullion and Columbia for sure, and Newport, definitely. Comet, it does get downy mildew, but it's really a strong, robust plant as an option for one of the more popular varieties. And for non-organic, or I put no organic, there's the ones you should probably stay away from, which are definitely not resistant to downy mildew. Centennial, Columbus, Glacier, Horizon, Zeus, Sterling, Cashmere, who's horrible with downy mildew, Nugget, which is actually very resistant to powdery mildew, but not downy mildew, and Hallertau mildew. It's really bad with funguses and even vermiculite wilt. So do your research before you choose, and make sure you stay away from most of these varieties if you want to try organic hops production. Okay, number 7 on our list is the trellis type that you plan on planting. I break it down into 3 categories: American trellis, a European trellis, or short trellis. So the first trellis type, American, is a bigger, larger trellis, typically with wider row spacing of 14 feet and 42 inches average in between plants. Of course, every variety, every farm is a little bit different. But varieties, American, big robust varieties like Cascade, Columbus, Chinook, Cluster are typical to go on American trellises. So the next type of trellis, I call it European trellis, where it's a high density planting, where they have rows of only 3.2 meters or a little over 10 feet, and then 1 meter or 39 inches between plants. This is varieties Sass, Fuggle, the Goldings, Hallertau mildew. They plant more plants per acre, where they end up getting about the same yield as in America, where they have less plants per acre with bigger plants. So the last type of trellis is called a short trellis, which is really only 10 feet tall, and they use tight 10 feet row spacing by 36-inch planting. There are actually dwarf hops, folks, including Pocket Talisman, Prima Donna from England. One of the most popular hops to make beer is actually Summit, which is a semi-dwarf, only on 10-foot trellis. Unfortunately, it's proprietary. So there's a few more here. I had a little asterisk next to them because they're not actually dwarf hops, but I have heard of these being grown on a low trellis, short trellis. Sass, Golding, Horizon. I even saw Sriracha in a publication grown on a short trellis. Plants that aren't as robust, some of the English plants or European plants, it'd be nice to test them out. If you do, let me know. Put comments below what you think, or if you have varieties you think might work. It'd be nice to hear from you. So number 7 on our list is sidearm length, which really goes hand in hand with your trellis design, because realize, folks, that your plant spacing, possibly your row spacing, even your irrigation may depend on the length of the sidearms of your hops plants. So we're going to talk about short, medium, and long sidearm hops plants. So short sidearms being 10 to 20 inches. You have variety Tetnang, Hallertau mildew, Sriracha Ace, American variety Centennial. Now varieties with medium sidearms of 20 to 30 inches. You have Cascade, Comet, Brewer's Gold. Well, we'll put Mount Hood in there, But Comet definitely has medium sidearms too. And now the monster plants with 30 to 48 inch or more long sidearms. You have Cluster, the Canadian Red Vine, Racal, Southern Cross, all them New Zealand hops, Pacific Gem. They all have big, long, rangy sidearms and are going to need a lot more space to be planted. So think about that when you design your trellis, and make sure you do your research. So number 8 is all about the climate where you're going to plant your hops. I labeled this cold, wet, hot, and dry because it depends on where you live and where you're going to plant your hops. If they have really, really cold winters, or areas really hot and really dry, areas where they have like a rainy season, it's important to pick your hops correctly. Well, the first thing I'll talk about is varieties that are bad in the extreme cold. What I mean is where it's really cold and they don't get a good snowpack to protect the crowns of the plants. And a lot of this has to do with plants that like nugget, where the crown is very high. So you're going to need to mulch or cover or something to protect these varieties in the winter where it's really cold. The Goldings, the Nugget, Sass, any of the New Zealand varieties, if it gets really cold in the winter, it can really hurt the crowns. Now I'm going to talk about the varieties that are bad in the extreme heat. Centennial and Williamette are really known to basically stop growing if the heat hits over 95 or 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And I put Citra in there even though it's a protected variety, because when I went to Yakima Valley last year during harvest season, Citra, the yield was down 10 to 20% because they had an epic there in July of about 15 days over 100 degrees. And this really burned the actual tips of the plants as they were growing and set back. Even though they did have a harvest, it wasn't nearly as good as usual because of the heat. So next, talking about the varieties that are bad where it's really wet. There's lots of rain. You can get the Sass and Sriracha where if the ground just stays wet too long, it really hurts the growth of the plants. And then basically any variety is bad with downy mildew. And you look back, I talked about downy mildew. And if you have a rainy season or maybe over there in England, think about where it rains a lot, think about not planting plants that are bad with downy mildew. So now the plants that are heat tolerant. Cascade and Comet in Brazil are two varieties that are really going strong. I know Cascade in Florida is really going good, and not that they don't need tons of water, folks, when it gets to be really hot, but they can handle the heat. And then any Neo-Mexican variety, just naturally in their native area, they were found out in the desert, they really typically can handle the heat. So remember, it's real important, besides these factors, there's lots of others. Do your own homework, folks. Ask the breeder who's giving you your plants or your rhizomes. If there's any farmers in your area, they're the best resource to ask about what type of plants will grow best depending on your climate. So next on our list is disease and insect resistance. Now this is real similar to organic production, but even if you're not growing organically, it might be to your advantage to consider varieties that have some kind of resistance to diseases, mainly the funguses and insects. Now you're never going to get every plant to be immune to these, but there are definitely some that are better than others. And the secret here is, folks, do your research. So I'm not going to go through tons of varieties because we already went through a lot of them, but you're basically looking at like downy mildew with fungal, powdery mildew. Nugget is really resistant. So as far as insects go, you have spider mites, aphids, leaf hoppers. Some areas have Japanese beetle. Now lanternflies are causing a problem on the east coast of the United States. So depending on where you live, folks, depends on what kind of bugs that grow there that can affect your hops production. So remember, aphids, you have Boadacia from England. It's a variety that's actually very resistant to aphids. So do your homework, do your homework, do your homework. So next on the list would be pH resistance or pH tolerance. As you could say, believe it or not, there are some hops that actually like or are more tolerant to acidic soil or even alkaline soil. And then there's those hops that can really handle most soils. So varieties that can handle and maybe even like acidic soil a little better are Crystal, Golden, Magnum, Mount Hood. And as for alkaline soils, there's not too many varieties that really enjoy alkaline soil, but Centennial can typically handle it slightly alkaline soil. So if your soil is on the neutral side or you really don't plan on testing and adjusting your soil too much, Brewer's Gold, Chinook, Newport can really handle most soils pretty easily, so you might want to consider one of them. But if your soil is typically acidic or alkaline, you might want to consider one of these other varieties. So a big thing they talk about when I visit Yakima in the United States is the alpha values of their crops. So we're going to talk about now, when you choose a variety, if you want aroma hops or bittering hops. And bittering typically are higher alpha, but not necessarily. So aroma hops really came into their own with the creation of craft beer almost a couple decades ago now. But the bittering is really coming back also. So it's kind of hard to predict the future, but you definitely need to decide on the variety you're going to plant, if you're going to plant aromatic or bittering type hops, or at the end we'll talk about dual use hops. First, aromatic. There's Sass and Fuggle and Tettnang, all European type, noble type hops, which are aromatic. Then there's Tahoma, which is a newer USDA variety. And there's tons of aromatic hops. Make sure you do your research, folks. And the same goes for bittering hop. There's tons of different varieties, but a few here: Zeus, Brewer's Gold, Sriracha Ace, and Pacific Gem from New Zealand. And then there are types like Centennial or Nugget or Comet or Chinook that are actually dual use type hops, where they are very aromatic, but their alpha acids are high enough to also use for bittering. So another thing you need to study before you choose the variety that you want to plant. So something that we actually probably do think about when we pick our hops variety is yield. And that's really important on our bottom line. So you have your low yielding varieties, which are typically the more aromatic type varieties, and all the noble and older varieties from Europe, Hallertau Miltefrüh, Fuggle, Sass, they're all lower yielding, anywhere from 1,000 to up to 1,700, 2,000 pounds per acre. And then there are the high yielding hops, which typically will give you up to 3,000 or more pounds per acre. You got Rakau from New Zealand, the mighty Zeus, new USDA variety Triumph. It's all about the yield, folks. So the next thing that we'll talk about is the ease of harvest. So for those of you that are hand picking, it's real simple. The plants with the biggest cones are typically easiest to pick. But I'm really talking about people who are using machines to pick their hops, wolves and larger machines, because when I went to Yakima, I learned a lot. This video here shows Comet hops, and no one, absolutely no one out there in Yakima likes to pick Comet, which I was surprised. And the reason why, because Comet cones break real easily. So they have like up to a 10 to 20% waste that goes out with the waste product after they pick the Comet hops. So any hops that are more fluffy, more wide open, the cones, all the Neo-Mexican hops are really tough to pick efficiently. If you want efficiency, you want nice compact cone like Cascade or round cones like Zeus. Okay, folks, coming to the end. Number 14 on our list is harvest timing. This is really important and something a lot of folks don't think about when choosing their hops variety. So what you don't want is all of your hops to become ready to harvest at the same time. It's really going to clog up your system. If you have, depending on how many varieties you have, you want to choose some varieties that you pick early and some middle and some late. As you can see in our calendar here, the Centennial are the first to come, right? And then Fugal, and in the middle you got Cascade and Comet, and all the way down at the end there's Nugget. So depending on what varieties, you can look, do your research. You're going to have to pick and try to plant so that they come ripe and ready to pick at different stages. And I've even seen growers who have maybe 5 varieties either switch up or plant another variety that's real early or real late because they have a little hole they want to plug in their system and in their processing. So here we are, tip 15. And I'm going to tell you a little story. Last time I went to Yakima, I was driving around one afternoon when I was free, and I stopped at a huge hops farm. They had a different kind of picker, and I was curious. And the worker sent me right next door, and I knocked on the door, and the owner of the farm came out and gave me a super tour of their whole facility. But at the end of the conversation, I asked him, I said, "Sir, with 600 acres of hops, why do you only have 5 varieties planted?" He said, "It's really simple, Max. I grow what I can grow, and I grow what I can sell." So, tip 15, growability and sellability. Probably the 2 most important things. Why grow what doesn't work? That's what he said. He said he's pulled whole 100 acres of plants because they were so bad with powdery mildew, and now he sticks to varieties that he knows grow good and he knows he can sell. 2 of the varieties I know he had were Eldorado and Citra, 2 of the top 4 or 5, Citra number 1 in the country. So, probably the most important thing, folks, grow what you can grow and grow what you can sell. Unless, of course, you just want to make some beer, and grow what kind of beer you're going to make. Well, thanks for being with me today, folks. If you like, put a thumbs up, give a little support, subscribe to our channel. If you've already subscribed, thanks a million. Cheers to life.